Vanessa Paradis, the girl robbed of her youth, and the secret love that changed Johnny Depp forever. Before she became the woman who could quiet the world's most rebellious movie star, Vanessa was the teenage girl France humiliated on live television, booed, mocked, and labeled the child everyone must hate. But from that wound came a truth she never spoke, a moment between her and Johnny that rewrote both of their lives, a moment the public has never heard, until now. Because behind their fame lies a story no one ever expected. Before their eyes ever met in that hotel hallway in Paris, Vanessa Paradis and Johnny Depp were living in two completely different worlds that seemed destined never to cross. Yet both carried wounds that had never fully healed, and it was those very scars that would make them recognize each other instantly. For Vanessa, life had been taken from her far too early. At just 14, she was singing before millions, absorbing every stare, every insult, every whispered judgment about her body, her voice, her attitude. Fame arrived without warning, ripping away her adolescence and forcing her to grow up inside a spotlight she never asked for. She learned to protect herself quietly, to build armor through elegance, silence, and control. From Joe Lou Taxi to Nose Blanche, from stage to film set, she became the girl who looked fragile but had learned to survive. A young woman shaped by pressure, misunderstanding, and an early lesson that success always has a price. Johnny Depp, before Vanessa, was a storm disguised as a movie star. Hollywood saw him as the beautiful outlaw, the man who escaped into strange, haunted characters because real life felt even more chaotic. He drifted from one explosive relationship to another, lost in a cycle of parties, alcohol, sleepless nights, and the loneliness that fame amplifies. Under the tattoos, the leather jackets, and the defiant stare was a boy who grew up in violence, poverty, and instability. Every role he chose, every rebellion, was partly an attempt to outrun the fear that he would never truly belong anywhere. Two lives, one crushed beneath the weight of early fame, the other unraveling under the chaos of too much freedom. And yet, both were searching for the same thing: peace. Not applause, not headlines, just the quiet certainty of being understood, being accepted, being safe in someone else's presence. That is what neither of them had, until the moment they crossed paths. One handshake, one electric second, a brief touch strong enough to change the trajectory of both their lives forever. Long before she ever learned how to love, Vanessa Paradis learned how to endure pain. Early fame did not open doors for her. It pushed her into a battlefield she never trained for. At 15, while most teenagers were still figuring out who they were, Vanessa was standing alone on a stage in Cannes, facing a crowd of adults who booed her, mocked her, and treated her success like a crime. 10 million people watched a child crumble on live television. 10 million people witnessed the moment her innocence was stripped away. What the public never understood was this: Vanessa was not prepared for any of it. She had no media coach, no emotional shield, no strategy. She was simply a girl who loved to sing. And suddenly, she became the girl everyone must hate, a symbol of jealousy, suspicion, and projection. Her hit song made her famous, but it also made her a target. People questioned her talent, her family, her integrity. They accused her of being manufactured, sexualized, manipulated. Anything to deny that a young girl could have natural charm and presence. School, which should have been a refuge, became another battlefield. Students whispered that she didn't look as good as on TV. Some spit on her as she walked down the street. Others scribbled insults on walls, as if fame stripped her right to be a normal teenager. Her teachers treated her with an awkward mix of admiration and resentment. Even friendships changed. The people closest to her had to watch her endure a cruelty no child deserves. And yet, Vanessa never broke in public. She held the song until the final note. She smiled on television when interviewers tried to humiliate her. She learned to keep her chin down, literally, because she didn't want to provoke anyone with confidence. She moved through life like someone walking barefoot over glass. Carefully, quietly, but always forward. What kept her alive was a single conviction. She wanted to leave a trace. Not fame, not noise, not a scandal, a trace. Something honest, something she could call hers. In private, the trauma shaped her more deeply than she ever admitted. It made her guarded. It made her allergic to gossip. It made her distrustful of attention. And most of all, it made her crave something she had never truly experienced, a safe space. A place where she wouldn't be judged, where no one would steal her innocence, where she could breathe without being watched. Years later, when she looked into the eyes of a man who carried his own wounds, she recognized that same search for safety. And that recognition would change everything. As Vanessa stepped out of adolescence and into early adulthood, she entered a world where beauty, desire, and power collided in ways she could not fully control. The public had already sexualized her long before she understood what sexuality meant. Every look she gave, every gesture she made on stage, was overanalyzed, framed as intention rather than innocence. And in the late 80s and early 90s, the media loved nothing more than turning a young woman into a symbol she never asked to be. At 16, Vanessa met Florent Pagny, a rising star 10 years older, confident, rebellious, and already hardened by the entertainment industry. To her, he felt like the first person who treated her not as an image, not as a scandal, but as a human being. He opened the door to adulthood, to independence, to a life beyond the suffocating walls of school and the carefully curated expectations of a young female celebrity. For a girl who had spent years being mocked, misunderstood, and controlled, Florent felt like freedom. But freedom came with consequences. Their relationship became instant tabloid fuel. France fixated on the age gap, on the intimacy, on the idea that Vanessa, still fragile from the wounds of early fame, had been taken. Overnight, she was no longer the overexposed teenager, but the controversial young woman living with a man in his mid-20s. Headlines exploded. Moral outrage followed. And once again, she became a mirror reflecting society's anxieties rather than her own truth. The backlash taught Vanessa her most important lesson. Visibility is dangerous. Love, if public, becomes a weapon. She realized the press did not care about her happiness, only about the story they could turn her into. So she made a vow she kept for years. Never again would she explain her private life to the media. After the breakup, Vanessa escaped to New York, a quiet exile in a city that did not know her face, her story, or her past. There, working on music with Lenny Kravitz, she finally tasted anonymity. No one shouted her name on the street. No one judged her clothing or her body language. For the first time since she was a child, she could simply walk. Lenny became her creative partner, possibly more, a connection surrounded by rumors but protected by her silence. What mattered was not the romance, but the comfort. Someone finally saw her as an artist, not a scandal. New York healed something in her. It softened the wound of early fame and prepared her for what was coming. A love unlike anything she had known. A love powerful enough to anchor a man as chaotic as Johnny Depp. Before Vanessa entered his life, Johnny Depp was a man spinning dangerously close to collapse. Hollywood adored him, but the adoration came wrapped in a curse. He was the beautiful misfit, the rebel with the haunted eyes, the actor who could transform into anyone except himself. And beneath the charisma, beneath the swagger, was a man quietly unraveling. Johnny grew up in a world built on instability. His childhood was marked by poverty, chaos, and a home where emotions often exploded instead of being spoken. As an adult, he carried those fractures with him, hiding them behind tattoos, guitars, and a string of roles that let him disappear into characters instead of confronting his own reality. Fame only sharpened the edges. Hollywood offered everything he thought he wanted, yet it amplified every wound he tried to bury. By the early 1990s, he was living on a razor's edge. His relationship with Winona Ryder had ended in heartbreak, leaving him raw and ashamed. Tattooing "Winona Forever" on his skin had seemed like devotion, but the breakup turned it into a reminder of everything he feared: abandonment, loneliness, and emotional failure. His romance with Kate Moss burned just as fiercely, fast, destructive, intoxicating. They loved each other with the intensity of two people trying to escape themselves, and the result was inevitable: chaos, broken hotel rooms, sleepless nights, and a growing sense that Johnny was losing control. He threw himself into nightlife, into alcohol, into characters that mirrored the storm inside him. Friends worried. Directors whispered. The press obsessed over every misstep. And yet, behind the headlines, there was something softer. A man who desperately wanted peace, family, quiet mornings, and a life where he didn't have to perform every second of every day. But he didn't know how to reach that life. Not yet. The irony was brutal. Millions saw him as the coolest man alive, while Johnny himself felt like a boy trapped in an adult body, still trying to understand why he could never truly feel safe. His fame, his beauty, his talent, none of it protected him from the loneliness that followed him like a shadow. And then came the moment that changed everything. A brief encounter in Los Angeles, a flash of a French girl with a quiet smile, planted a seed he couldn't forget. She passed through his life like a ghost at a party he no longer wanted to attend. He didn't know her name, didn't know her world, but he felt something move inside him. Something he hadn't felt in years, calm. Years later, when he saw her again in Paris, that feeling returned instantly. This time, he wasn't going to let it slip away. It happened in seconds, a moment small enough to overlook, yet powerful enough to rewrite the course of two lives. Paris, 1998. Vanessa Paradis was walking through the lobby of the Hotel Costs, a place of dim lights, whispered conversations, and the soft rustle of expensive coats. She was 25, already a woman forged through fire, quieter now, more controlled, wrapped in an elegance built from survival rather than glamour. She was in Paris for work, preparing to dive into Girl on the Bridge, a film that required all the emotional precision she had spent years learning to protect. Johnny Depp entered the lobby at the exact moment she did. He wasn't the swaggering Hollywood outlaw the world adored. Not tonight. He was tired. A man with too many late nights behind him and too many thoughts he didn't want to face. His relationship with Kate Moss had ended in a spiral that left both of them wounded. He had fled Los Angeles for a while, looking for something that felt real, clean, quiet, even if he didn't yet know what that was. And then he saw her. Not the Vanessa Paradis on magazine covers. Not the pop sensation. Not the actress. Just a girl walking past him with a kind of softness that hit him like a shock. Vanessa felt it too, before she even knew who he was. She once said she felt him everywhere, even before her eyes registered his face. It wasn't attraction at first. It wasn't desire. It was recognition. Like meeting someone whose presence fits into a shape inside you that had been empty far too long. Their eyes met. Johnny stopped. Vanessa stopped. A moment of silence in the middle of a crowded lobby. He reached out his hand. She placed hers in his. And that was it. A spark without effort. A stillness without fear. A connection without explanation. Johnny would later say, "The moment my hand touched hers, everything stopped. I knew." What neither of them knew at that moment was how quickly their worlds would collide. 3 months later, Vanessa was pregnant with their first child. Johnny, the man who spent years running from relationships, burning through love until it turned to smoke, suddenly found himself building a home, designing a nursery, choosing a life far away from Hollywood's chaos. Their love didn't begin with fireworks. It began with relief. Johnny found in Vanessa the quiet he had been searching for since childhood, a woman who didn't demand, didn't perform, didn't need him to be a legend. She needed him to be steady, to be present, to be real. And he rose to that demand without hesitation. Vanessa found in Johnny a kind of emotional protection she had never experienced. Someone who didn't want to sculpt her, use her, project onto her, or control her image. Johnny didn't want Vanessa Paradis, the icon. He just wanted Vanessa. In the months that followed, they lived in a small, almost anonymous rhythm. No red carpets. No parties. No tabloid stunts. They hid in cafes in Paris, wandered through markets, cooked meals together in quiet kitchens. In the south of France, they walked barefoot through their garden, picking fruit with hands still discovering the comfort of domestic life. People close to them said it was the happiest they had ever seen Johnny. Years later, he would repeat the same words in interviews. "She saved me." But love that deep always carries a shadow. Two people with wounds that old cannot build a life without those scars touching. And slowly, quietly, the cracks began to form. For the world, Vanessa Paradis and Johnny Depp were a fairy tale. A French chanteuse with a quiet soul and an American movie star with a rebel's heart. The kind of couple people whispered about in cafes and imagined as the perfect blend of elegance and wildness. But behind the photographs, behind the soft smiles and intertwined hands, were 14 years shaped by tenderness, sacrifice, distance, and the slow, quiet erosion that fame always brings. In the early years, their love felt like a refuge. They chose to live away from Hollywood, in a stone house tucked deep inside the countryside of the south of France. The property stretched across 7 hectares, surrounded by vines, lavender, and the hum of cicadas. There was no gate, no security team, no entourage. Only a mailbox without a name, a small act of rebellion against the world that had tried to claim their lives before they even met. Johnny would fly back and forth from film sets, carrying gifts in old suitcases, arriving at odd hours just to spend a night at home. Vanessa would greet him barefoot, their children clinging to her legs, laughter spilling out into the garden. Those were the years when Johnny said he felt human for the first time, when he could chop wood, paint at sunrise, or fall asleep beside someone who didn't expect him to be anything but a man in love. Vanessa blossomed into a calmer version of herself. She wrote music about domestic bliss, recorded bliss with Johnny behind the camera, capturing her in soft light among trees and shadows. In that video, she isn't a star. She's a woman who has found peace, singing for the man she loves and the family they built. But stability always comes at a cost, especially when one person lives in the spotlight and the other carries the scars of fame. Johnny's career exploded. Blockbusters, awards, press tours across continents. The world demanded more of him every year, while Vanessa anchored their family in France, raising their 2 children with gentleness and fierce privacy. She chose distance from Hollywood, believing it would protect their kids from the chaos she had endured in her own youth. Yet the distance between their worlds grew too. Johnny lived on film sets for months at a time. The long separations created a silence neither of them knew how to break. Vanessa remained loyal, steady, protective, but she could not save him from his growing demons. Stress, insomnia, and old patterns crept back into Johnny's life. The man who once escaped Hollywood now found himself swallowed by it again. And Vanessa, the woman who had learned to survive pain in silence, did exactly what she had always done. She endured. Without complaints, without interviews, without letting the press hear even a whisper. To the public, they looked perfect. Inside the home, they were drifting. By the early 2010s, the cracks had deepened. Not through betrayal or cruelty, but through exhaustion. Johnny was consumed by work. Vanessa was consumed by their children. Both loved each other, but neither could return to the simplicity that brought them together. And so, after 14 years, they made the decision that broke millions of hearts. They separated. There was no scandal, no accusations, no bitterness in the press. Only respect, silence, and the weight of an ending both had tried to avoid. Vanessa returned to her music and films. Johnny began a new chapter, one that would eventually spiral into darker battles. But the truth remains. Those 14 years were the closest either of them ever came to peace. Their breakup did not explode, it dissolved. Quietly, almost politely, like 2 people who had loved each other too deeply to let the world witness the fracture. In a Hollywood landscape built on spectacle, the end of Vanessa Paradis and Johnny Depp was astonishing for one reason. It was dignified. There were no interviews, no accusations, no public wounds. Just a simple statement confirming that the couple who once found sanctuary in each other was now walking separate paths. And yet, beneath that calm surface, both were shaken in ways they never publicly admitted. For Vanessa, the separation meant rebuilding a life she had willingly anchored around their family. For years, she had turned down roles, paused music projects, and chosen stability over spotlight. Now, she faced a future where she needed to stand alone again, not as Johnny Depp's partner, not as the mother living quietly in the French countryside, but as an artist rediscovering her own rhythm. She returned to film with a maturity shaped by everything she had lived through. Audiences noticed it, the gravitas, the softness, the emotional precision. Vanessa had always been talented, but now she carried something deeper, the kind of truth that only comes from knowing heartbreak without bitterness. Meanwhile, Johnny's life took a darker turn. Freed from the stability Vanessa once provided, he slipped back into old habits and new troubles. The man who felt grounded in the simplicity of their French home now drifted through scandals, lawsuits, and the slow unraveling of his public image. Even in the chaos that followed, you could hear the echo of what he had lost, a quiet that no other relationship ever gave him again. And yet, Vanessa never said a cruel word about him. Not in interviews. Not in passing. Not even when the world begged her for a headline. Her silence was not cold. It was loyalty. A final act of respect for the years they shared, for the children they raised, and for the version of Johnny she once loved, the one she protected from the world long before the world turned against him. She focused on her children, giving them the stability she never had growing up. While paparazzi chased Johnny from courthouse to courthouse, Vanessa slipped through life almost unnoticed, playing roles that earned acclaim, recording music quietly, and preserving the one thing fame never allowed her as a teenager: privacy. The breakup did not define her. It refined her. To this day, when asked about Johnny, she speaks with a calm that hints at a deeper truth. Their story mattered. It changed them. It shaped them. And even though it ended, it never turned ugly, because it had never been built on illusion. 14 years of love cannot simply vanish. It settles inside you, quietly, like a country you once lived in and still dream about. In the end, Vanessa Paradis became something far more powerful than a pop phenomenon, a Chanel icon, or the woman Johnny Depp once loved. She became a symbol of endurance, a reminder that you can survive the world's cruelty, outgrow your own wounds, and still remain gentle. Her story is not the story of a victim. It is the story of a girl who entered fame too early, was judged too harshly, and yet refused to let bitterness shape her. Each chapter of her life hardened her without hardening her heart. From the jeers at Midam to the whispers in school corridors, from tabloid obsession to the pressure of being a teenage beauty dissected by adults, she never allowed the world to break her. Instead, she rewrote herself. As an artist, she embraced absence as part of her mystique, disappearing for years, only to return with work filled with nuance and quiet emotional honesty. As a mother, she protected her children with the same ferocity she once used to protect her own identity. And as a woman, she carried her past with grace, acknowledging its scars without letting them define her. Her relationship with Johnny Depp remains one of the most enduring enigmas in modern celebrity culture. It never turned toxic, never became a weapon, never dissolved into public spectacle. It existed in its own universe, built on respect, restraint, and a kind of love that doesn't need to scream to be real. Even years after their separation, the way they speak about each other suggests a truth most people overlook. What they had was rare, maybe even irreplaceable. But Vanessa's legacy is not tied to any man. It is tied to the way she walked through fire without letting the flames change her silhouette. The way she learned to say no, to producers, to journalists, to directors, even to Serge Gainsbourg when a song felt wrong. The way she learned to live quietly in a world that rewards noise. And above all, the way she reclaimed the youth that fame tried to steal from her by creating the kind of life she once dreamed of, soft, private, and her own. Today, when Vanessa speaks, her voice carries a serenity shaped by decades of learning how to exist on her own terms. She is no longer the girl in the yellow taxi. She is no longer the teenager the world misunderstood. She is a woman who survived fame, survived heartbreak, survived expectation, and still believes in beauty. Her life answers a question many never dare to ask. What does it mean to be free when the world tries to define you? For Vanessa Paradis, the answer has always been the same. To disappear when necessary. To return only when it matters. And to leave a trace no one can erase.